Welcome back to another installment of studentrentertips.com. In this session, we're going to talk about the difference between subleases and assignments and when you might use those. So first, you might be wondering, well, what is a sublease? And that's pretty straightforward. It's when you transfer some of your interest to somebody else to take over your tenancy. In other words, you're trying to find somebody else to fulfill your obligations to pay rent. So the first question is, can you sublease? Well, we talked about in one of the first videos about the lease that in order to be able to sublease, you have to be able to do that under the terms of the lease. Oftentimes in form leases, landlords will exclude subleasing and assigning the lease. This is in their interest because they don't like it when they have to deal with somebody that they didn't make an original contract with. So sometimes, even if it's excluded though, you should think about trying to contact your landlord. As we talked about in another video, it's important to have a good relationship with your landlord. So if you have a good relationship with your landlord, he or she may be willing to let you still sublease to somebody else if they know who that person is, or you get that all in writing. So check with that. The second is, what's the difference between a sublease and an assignment? A sublease is a transfer of only some of your interest to another person. For college students, this is often seen when they go home for the summer and they've signed a one-year lease and they're still obligated to pay rent over those 3 months. It can be sometimes very beneficial for them to save the rent that they might have to pay over those 3 months, so they would try to sublease. An assignment instead is when you transfer all of your interest in a property to somebody else. It's in lieu of breaking a lease. You're finding somebody else to take over all your obligations to the landlord under the lease. So let's talk about how a sublease works, because that's really the most common, I think, for college students, because a lot of times they study abroad or they are looking for somebody else to take their place for the summer. The way a sublease works is when you if your landlord agrees to a sublease, you become, in a certain sense, a sub-landlord, because your subtenant never pays their rent directly to the landlord. You still have obligations to your landlord. So the way that it works is you pay your landlord your rent, and then you are paid rent from your subtenant. All of the obligations that you had under the lease are still your obligations, in terms of maybe there's a no pet provision, or there's a requirement of quiet by a certain hour. You're still bound by those, and you would be held liable if your subtenant didn't abide by those rules. So it's important as a college student to know, who are you subleasing to? You don't want to just sublease to anybody, because they could destroy the property in some way and you would be responsible to your landlord. So just to recap, the tips for this subsection are: make sure you look in your lease to see if you can sublease or assign. If it excludes it explicitly in the lease, you can't do it without your landlord's written consent as an addendum to your actual lease. But that doesn't stop you from talking to your landlord, and you should approach it because it can be very financially valuable to you. The second thing is, if you are able to sublease, make sure that you sublease to somebody that you can trust. You don't want somebody who's going to come in and trash the place. You don't want somebody who's not going to take care of what your obligations are, because you may be held responsible for that. Thanks for listening, and make sure you click on the other links on the website.